Dear follower, I'm sure this has happened to you at some point. You're playing a game of chess and suddenly you think, for example, my opponent's going to play this. If I capture it, they'll do this, and I'll end up better off. Well, the thing is that when we play, we can't check the game, for instance, with analysis engines. So basically, what we evaluate is just what we believe, not the absolute truth. And many times, and here's the heart of the matter, we get the evaluation wrong. Exactly. In today's class, we're going to look at this and try to solve it a bit too. Therefore, try to improve our chess level. I'm bringing you a game played between the 8-time Russian champion Svidler, an extremely strong player, and with the black pieces, the very famous Michael Adams. In other words, a high-level game. But the important thing is the lessons that we're going to take away from it. So enjoy it a lot. Leave a like if you want more videos like this, and let's get to it. The game started with a Ruy Lopez opening. I hope that by now we all know which opening this is. Knight f3, attacking the e5 pawn, knight c6, defending it, and indeed this bishop b5, characteristic of the Spanish opening or Ruy Lopez opening. The task is simple, right? If this is the defending knight, well, I'm going straight to attack it. Obviously, there's a lot of theory after this move, but this way we at least know the basics of the Spanish opening. A 6, kicking this bishop out, this is the most popular move of all to face this Spanish opening. You should know that the exchange is possible, but it's not the sharpest variation of all. Surely many of you are thinking, I eliminate the knight and then I capture this pawn, but this isn't possible because simply after capturing with the d pawn, once we recapture this pawn with the knight, there would be the move queen d4, attacking the pawn and the knight and giving a certain advantage to the black pieces. Therefore, following this specific move, a 6, challenging the position of the bishop decides to simply retreat back, maintaining, however, the constant pressure on this knight. If in the future, for example, this pawn is defended, now it really is threatening to capture and capture, thus winning a pawn. Black opts for the Berlin defense, a very, very, very solid defense. This is the exact defensive setup that the legendary player Vladimir Kramnik chose to use during his intense World Championship match battle against Kasparov, and in fact, he won it. He was proclaimed world champion using this defense. So, what can I say? It's a very strong defense. I'm going to move forward a little bit more because this isn't what's truly important in the video in question, although it's always good to learn from each and every one of the moves in the game, and especially also from the plans. Castling for white and bishop to c5, a slightly, let's say, novel variation. This game was played in the year 2000, okay? In case you want to study it later. Normally, this Berlin defense is played with the bishop on e7, the pawn on d6, and castling. Differences between this and the bishop on c5? Well, like everything in life, dear friends, it has pros and it has cons. Pros, it's obviously clear. This bishop is much more active than it would be, for example, on e7, where it hits its own knight. Plus, it can always take cover in this square, in this hole the black piece is created on the a7 square, and it'll always be pointing at the king. Therefore, for example, this pawn will be completely immobile. A typical example when the bishop is placed on this diagonal or on this diagonal for the white pieces is that if we move this h3 pawn at some point, this square is completely indefensible. Right now. Why? Because this pawn doesn't defend it, and this one, though it seems like it does, doesn't either because the bishop pins the king. So the king would have to move to be able to defend this square. How interesting all of this is, right? What are the cons of the bishop on c5? Because of course, it also has cons. The most important one is that the king will be much more exposed. He won't be as well defended by the bishop directly toward his knight. For example, some attacks from this bishop, like bishop g5 hitting this knight, it would already pin the queen. Then you could try to threaten with this knight and, well, we'd have a super interesting game, right? Pros and cons of this move. Quickly, the white player, Svidler, wants to exploit this central position of the undefended bishop by trying to squeeze it with c3. C3 is a move with a dual function. The first is to give this bishop an escape to c2 in case black tries to play b5 and knight a5 at some point to win this bishop. You should know that in both the Ruy Lopez and the Spanish opening, our best weapon is practically the light squared bishop, also known as the Spanish bishop. So we must always try to take great care of it to leave it this little hole so it can be recycled at some point. Another function of this c3 is to support the pawn that could break on d4 in the future, or who knows, alternatively, also playing in the Gioco piano style of the Italian with d3 and having all the squares well defended. And the last function of this c3 is to prevent knight jumps toward the center of the board. Therefore, we can see that every move makes a lot of sense, and these types of players didn't make moves just for the sake of it. The game continues with b5. Where are we going to retreat the bishop? To b3 or to c2? Both would be possible, but you should know that if, for example, we retreated here, it can always be within range of a knight jump. We can literally place it directly on c2 now, where it's true, it seems to be hitting the pawn structure. But you never know when we can open the center and have these bishops attack directly toward the black king's castled position. The game continues with d6. And white could make many moves here. That's true. They could play, for example, d3, so that now they could develop the bishop and knight. They could play d4 directly, but they make the move a4, an extremely interesting move. First of all, it poses a serious threat. What threat? You see it, right? Pawn takes pawn, winning a pawn, says this pawn couldn't be recaptured because the rook is undefended on the a file. Therefore, black has to do something, either react here or move this bishop so the queen defends the rook. Obviously, as you know, every pawn move creates weaknesses, and we must think very carefully about all pawn moves because they're the only piece that doesn't go backward. It seems like a much better idea to develop this bishop. But well, where are we going to develop it? Well, it seems the most active square of all, without a doubt, is this one here, right? Bishop g4. Let's see. The idea is obvious. Put pressure on the knight since it's pinned. The queen is pinned, let's say. And if this queen ever tries to unpin itself, then we could capture this knight and completely damage the pawn structure of white's castle position. And this would probably be a great advantage for the black side. The game continues with d3. A solid, quiet response in the Joko piano style, but one that'll be dangerous in the future. The idea is obvious. Develop the knight and the bishop. With this pawn on d2, it can't be developed. For now, white has all the pawns well placed. Now, after this castling, h3 asking this bishop what it wants to do. Logically, it's not going to exchange for the knight because it would improve our queen situation. They would lose the strength they have from the pin, which is important, and they would also lose the bishop pair. Therefore, bishop takes knight is a move that has 3 flaws and no added value. So without a doubt, the best move is to retreat the bishop to the only square that maintains pressure on the knight and the queen. The game continues with knight from b to d2, although at first glance, the development of our dark squared bishop is being delayed. All this is very, very theoretical in these types of structures. The knight comes out via b2 to try to also defend this knight. And not only that, but in some cases, this knight tries to do this typical maneuver. Rook e1, knight f1, knight g3, from where it very strongly attacks this bishop, which should retreat, and then they usually come with the knights to f5, to the beloved and hated for the black pieces, Kasparov's office, which is placing a knight on f5 in these types of positions. Look how interesting these types of knight maneuvers are, right? It's so interesting to understand these games in such depth because you really learn a lot. And you'll see that today's game will blow your mind because many pieces will be traded soon. And in a few moves, you'll have very few pieces left on the board, but with extreme positional understanding. Look at black's move, b4. What do you think of this move? Well, it's interesting. I won't deny that. And we always have to keep these moves in mind and try to tread very, very, very carefully. The idea is that now, if we don't do anything and continue with our plan, for example, rook e1, in order to move their knight, they're going to shut down this entire pawn structure with the move of 5. And we're just letting them gain all this space without getting anything in return. And we don't want that. So look at this. When this b4 is played, the player here is Swidler, the 8-time Russian champion, which is quite something, and he understands perfectly that he shouldn't allow this a5. Because this a5 would be, well, leaving a very strong pawn structure here with a lot of space on the queen side, which, when these two pieces retreat, could even be advanced further, and therefore he'd be in a great spot. So he plays a5, which does two things. It leaves this b4 pawn completely isolated, first of all, and second, it has fixed the weakness on a6. What does it mean to fix a weakness? Well, it means not letting it ever advance because it'll have this wall in front of it and won't be able to move forward. And as you can see, it's a weakness because his partner has advanced too far and left it completely alone. It has launched itself like a kamikaze into the battle flank and left it in the rear completely alone. And you'll see how well Smidler takes advantage of it to attack it directly. Here, the black player, Adams, defends this pawn with threats of capturing and opening the file for his rook. It makes perfect sense, but we already see that with the move queen e2. He's putting pressure, he's keeping an eye on the a6 point, which is completely weak. Things like d4 are threatened, aiming for a central break and also threatening the a6 pawn, which is completely weak. Pawn takes pawn on c3 to exchange this completely weak pawn and to open the file for the black pieces. This is correct. And here, the black player decides it's time to break the center with d5. Good. Now, many of you might be thinking, what do I do? How? Do I let him take? Do I just ignore it? Right? But look, players this strong understand something. Every pawn move they make creates weaknesses. And what weakness does it leave? The e5 pawn. They were defended it perfectly, but with this advance, now what happens to this pawn? It's been left completely alone and defenseless. Therefore, the white player asks himself one thing. Is there a threat against we? Yes, capturing here, but I really have it ultra mega defended with the pawn, with the knight, with the bishop, and with the queen. Am I worried about them capturing her? No. So there's nothing to fear because the only possible capture black has is this one. If they advance, this wouldn't be a very good idea either. Why? Because simply we, for example, let's suppose the white plays here, and they play something like, I don't know, I'm going to make it up. I don't know what to tell you. Let's kick out this bishop, for example. Black leaves, right? This would be a completely normal move. White continues to press, right? For example, this knight. Actually, what I'm seeing here is that black never has time to either capture or advance. And if they capture to threaten this pawn, we're simply going to bring more pieces to the attack. So now you're going to be blown away by the move white makes. Now you're going to be blown away. You're going to like this move a lot. Here, after this d5, he realizes exactly that he doesn't care at all if they capture or advance because the tempos we have to win are many, and he makes the surprising and at the same time very good move d4. Well, surely this would be very scary for many of you. There are many central captures here. What can happen? Can many things happen? Nah, don't worry. If we had already seen that if they capture this pawn, nothing happens, the only thing we have to see is what happens if they capture this one, and we see that nothing happens either. What would happen if they capture this pawn? For example, here. Well, the good thing is that this is what happened in the game, so let's see it live. Would it be a good idea to recapture it? No, it would be a very bad idea. And let me explain. If we capture here now, they would simply capture us with the knight. They would have won a central pawn. They would threaten this knight and especially this bishop, and this position would be very interesting for black. However, do you remember something? By advancing this pawn, what were we threatening? The a6 point, therefore we're not worried at all because we're attacking this point, and look, after pawn takes pawn, queen takes a6, and this knight that is undefended is also threatened. And do you see what Svidler has achieved here? What is this? A passed pawn, which, by the way, I don't know when you'll be watching this video, but today I'm going to upload a 45-minute class to the Academy about the passed pawn. And I'm going to give you many tips for playing it both for and against. It's going to fascinate you. For those of you inside the Academy, just so you know, an email will be coming to notify you, but you'll have it there anyway. It's going to be a completely extra class, and I'm going to upload quite a few. If you're not in the Academy, I'm going to leave it for you down here in the description, okay? Very well. So here, the knight's being threatened, and they have two options. Move the knight away, that would be the first one, or the other, the one that happened in the game, pawn takes pawn. If you threaten one of my knights, I threaten your other one. And so the exchanges happen here. Queen takes knight, pawn takes knight. Important. What do we do with this pawn? Do we recapture it with the bishop? No, it would be a mistake because if bishop takes pawn, then we'd simply be letting them trade here at some point. And then they double these pawns. And as we said, that wasn't a good idea. First, they should probably play queen d6 because this bishop is undefended, but it's not a good idea. It seems much better to capture with the knight, and even if this bishop is a bit trapped now, it can get out without any problem because we've opened the center. The game continues by moving this bishop away from the threat, bishop d4, while they attack the rook on a1, as you can see. What sets basic players apart from elite grandmasters is that they're always looking for problems for their opponents, right? Look now at how he creates a problem for the rook. They come to attack the bishop, and now, instead of moving it, pawn takes pawn, and what they do is defend it with the queen. How interesting. For now, the game is having several exchanges, and wait, because it doesn't end here. Knight takes pawn, knight takes knight, and as you can imagine, bishop takes knight. Interesting moment in the game. A lot of pieces have been traded, but if we count, we have queen against queen, two rooks against two rooks, and two bishops against two bishops. And then for pawns, we have 3 against 3 here, and a passed pawn on C for black, and a passed pawn on A for white. Very well, but if we evaluate who's better here, what would you say? Well, probably for the machines, for the analysis engines, this would be a very close position. Why? Because both sides have the same pieces, a passed pawn for each, and machines defend everything. But in practice, who's going to have a planned advantage? Who's going to be easier to play? Logically, the white pieces. Why? Because look at this passed pawn. Not only is it much closer to promoting, but no one is blocking it, and it's also supported by the rook. And not only that, but this bishop can move, and the other rook can also come to support, right? So here, in practice, the white pieces are much better, but look how interesting. Black comes to attack the rook. They probably had already calculated this beautiful combination made by the white player, Svidler. However, here you have to calculate two moves mainly. The first would be rook e1, which is not a good move. It's not a good move because here, honestly, black would still win a rook with this move right here. Both the queen and rook are under attack. So tell me, Chessteacher, why isn't this move so good? Because it's a tactical blow. You must always look for tactical blows when there are loose pieces on the board. This piece is loose, meaning no one defends it, and the move bishop takes h7 would win back the piece while gaining a pawn. If king takes, then the queen would come through here and win this bishop. And not only that, but it's also attacking this other bishop. Michael Adams had already anticipated this, and that's why after the check he moved the king back to the 8th square. The game continues in the following way. The bishop retreats almost to its original square, and he doesn't care if they capture this rook. And let me explain. Capturing this rook probably would have been interesting, but it's actually quite scary. Why? Because if the rook is captured, the queen could surely come to e4, threatening the bishop, threatening checkmate, then f5 would follow, queen f4, threatening to enter with both bishops. Also with the rook, and this would be, well, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. But watch out, the machines would defend themselves. However, a human is afraid to capture this rook because the threats are so strong that it would probably scare all of us. So what black does here is play rook e8. The game continues with rook e1. Now, before it's too late, he's basically saying, I'm not going to let you capture the rook, but having said that, this looks like it's winning for black. Why? I'm going to leave you thinking about where you would place that queen. If you want, you can pause the video. You've realized it, right? That queen doesn't have a single square. That queen is lost. So here, mistakenly, and this is what often happens to us, the black player might evaluate, I'm much better here. I'm going to win my opponent's queen and he won't be able to checkmate me. And that's correct. But what he completely miscalculated in his assessment is that the queen could actually be sacrificed, trading the queen for a rook and then promoting a pawn to a new queen. And now rook for bishop, and the material is the same. We're equal in material. Why? Because white has traded their queen for a rook, a bishop, and a pawn, right? So it's 9 points against 9 points, but white's pieces are much, much better. Let me explain. This rook is going to enter at any moment. The king's safety is terrible. The two bishops, well, the thing is how strong the two bishops are, friends, when there's an open position, meaning without pawns. Why? Because they occupy all the squares on the board. They're very strong. One occupies all the white ones and the other all the black ones. And the combination with the two rooks against this king really makes this position much better for the white pieces. And I'm going to show you, and you're going to love it. Look at how Svidler uses the pieces here, saying, look at how I'm going to do it, huh? The move e5 makes all the sense in the world. It defends against his bishop. We might think that a good move here would be, for example, pinning this bishop against the queen and then attacking it with the bishop. But actually, the move queen f6 keeps defending and absolutely nothing would happen here, and they get out of the pin. So look at what the white player correctly does here. Besides the material equality and the attack they have on the enemy king, what strong asset do they have that it seems we've already forgotten? That massive pass pawn that now moves to a6, and it's going to be a beastly headache. Queen d7, a7, rook 8, and this pawn is simply one square away from promoting. And if you want, you can pause the video right now, because here the white player, Svidler, made a spectacular move that'll make your hair stand on end. I'm going to say it right now. The move is as follows. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes e5, obviously a double exclamation mark. I ask you, can that rook be taken? Well, no, it didn't happen in the game, but if this rook had been captured, let's try to mentally calculate what would have happened. It's not hard to understand. So look, if bishop takes rook, this rook comes to h4, given check. The king would have to move away, see? And then what would happen? That between the two bishops given check, the king would have to move, the other bishop would also come in given check, or more precisely, even entering with the rook on the back rank, and the king would have to move. For example, after a check, the bishop covers the exchanges. Since the rook has come to check the king, we would capture this rook here, and what would happen is that simply this rook has been exchanged for this one, but really, this pawn's promotion could no longer be stopped in any way. Why? Because when the rook is back here, simply the only thing they can do to avoid the plan, for example, of rook b1 and promotion, would be to threaten this pawn with the queen, for example, by placing the queen around here. But what would happen? That then, since the king, for example, would be around here, the rook would sacrifice itself given check, the king would have to capture it, and then it would promote. Look what an interesting version, huh? That you can review again, or you can do it yourselves on the board, so you don't get bored of what would happen if black decides to capture this gift, to accept this gift. And obviously they didn't, but instead they made this move here, g6, trying to defend against the entry of the bishop as well, and especially that of the rook. And how does the game continue? Well, the rook, if it can't enter through here, places itself on the fourth rank, where it not only wants to enter through here, but also threatens the bishop. A bishop that must move or at least be defended, so that now at least they attack this a7 pawn, right? That's what they really want to do, capture that pawn. But look at how the white player continues with a lot of patience. Rook a6. It's threatening to enter through here with drastic consequences. Black won't be able to defend themselves, but at least they can recover this pawn. And look what a beautiful way to finish. Rook takes g6. Do you see what's being threatened or not with rook takes g6? Mate on the next move. The typical two rook mate, even though there are more pieces on the board, right? So here black tries to defend against this checkmate. Now, it wouldn't be checkmate if the rook comes through here, because the king could escape, though likely not for long. The idea is that here, just look at the beautiful move by the player with the white pieces, Svidler, who plays bishop b2. Taking advantage of the pressure on his bishop, it can't be captured even if it looks like a gift, because then it would be mate again. See, if bishop takes, the rook would come to h4 and it would be mate again. Therefore, here black tries to make this move right here, queen b5, and the subtle bishop c3 makes it so black obviously has to resign here, and I'll explain why. These bishops can't be attacked in any way with the queen, because all the squares are completely covered between them and the rook. See how important it is sometimes to have bishops on squares in open positions? And the important thing is that now it's going to be played no matter what black does. For example, the rook that is on e4 would be placed on g4 in such a way that this bishop can no longer be saved. And not only that, but once this bishop has disappeared between the two rooks and the two bishops, it's impossible for this king, completely alone, because he is alone, to be saved. Therefore, we've seen that here black incorrectly evaluated that by capturing the queen, they would be better off. Erroneously. By capturing the queen, they're worse off. And look what happened to them. A true work of art. What'd you think? Leave a like if you enjoy these kinds of games, and leave me a comment to let me know what you thought, or if you'd seen it before, or whatever you want, as I always try to read you. Remember well that today you're going to have a great class, I assure you, a great one on on passed pawns in the academy. Yes, I'm going to leave for you down here in the description. You already know everything that's inside the academy besides weekly classes and a whole lot more, and access to 60 opening courses, and well, you already know, right? Stop being so annoying, chess teacher. We already know what's in the academy, man. I'm probably even a student already, so I won't say anything else about that. I'll leave it here in the description. I hope you loved this video, and we'll see you tomorrow as always, friends, in the next video. Goodbye.